If you're online or you love to aspire to have the lifestyle of your favorite TikTok influencers, then this is the video for you because you have noticed something. You have noticed the unnoticeable, a shift into now the secret lives of socialist socialites, a paradox that I like to argue is not a paradox at all. But instead, we are now seeing an expansion on how the everyday person talks about power, policy, and politics in an online space, even if inconspicuous or not. Instead, we are exploring this so-called paradox. But I bet you're wondering, what does this have to do with you? Well, it's showing a shift in online culture, not just how we represent the political identities that we are trying to fight against or be, but it's also a online culture war of what wealth and affluence really looks like to a variety of different people from different social classes. It is the collapsing of a social class culture war through art, purpose, and taste. And rather, despite that gap in taste and in art and inconspicuous abundance closing, we are starting to still see a gaping hole in wealth disparities across the US. We'll answer the question, how does the it girl archetype online make a political statement? Or is it political in general? What happened to dinner parties? And why is it a dying art? And is this a bigger symptom of what Gen Z is trying to do to climb the social ladder despite all these wealth disparities against all these different generations? Especially when we are just the regular normies trying to live a normal but happy life on and offline. We are seeing a small rise in people online who dub themselves as socialist socialites, who live a lavish life despite having contradicting beliefs in a system that perhaps does not want them to have that wealth, which I disagree, because today we're going to talk about what it means to also be in a socialist democracy where we pursue proper happiness and equality. Hi icons, my name is Mila, and if you do not know already, this is a Substack adjacent podcast series on my socials. I also have a Substack called Vanity Thoughts where I talk about beauty, politics, and power through the lens of internet culture. On top of that, if you find that interesting and you want exclusive Substack content like video essays, posts, essays, etc., or reads, writes, or watches, consider becoming a free subscriber on my Substack, link below. However, if you want extra exclusive content, there is stuff available for the paid tier on my Substack. So consider becoming a paid contributor if you want something like, say, the extended cut of this research project, which covers Chapter 4 and Chapter 6, where we talk about the death of the dinner party. We talk about how Gen Zs are trying to climb the social ladder. We talk about inconspicuous consumption, taste culture wars, and all of the above, and how staying in is the new status symbol, and what does it mean to be a lazy socialist socialite. Thank you for checking out my Substack. Without further ado, let's get into today's topic. Chapter 1, the history of the socialite. 2002 to the 2020s. The word socialite was first attested in 1909 in a Tennessee newspaper. It became popular, though, by use in the Times magazine in 1920s, which is also known as being the time where we started seeing the first renditions of the it girl, which will be a topic for another time. If we're trying to think about what socialites are meant to look like in a modern American culture, we can look at Gossip Girl. XOXO. A TV show from the early 2000s to 2010s that focuses on the lives of New York socialites who live in Manhattan or the Upper East Side, and shows a strong influence in the 21st century culture when it comes to wealth and affluence, especially when it comes to scandal. Wealth and fashion are favorite things. According to the New York Times, socialites spend between $98K and $455K per year, young and old, to maintain their roles. Would justify spending on evening wardrobes of an individual that would then regularly attend these functions as part of their job. Think about the Kardashian-Jenner family, Jill Kelly, Olivia Palmera, Paris Hilton. Keep in mind that during this time in the early 2000s, predating modern social media, a socialite did not have to have socials. She just got paid to exist. She got paid to be there, basically, to be affluent, to be there. People forget that sometimes, that Paris Hilton was not on social media during the early 2000s because TikTok wasn't a thing yet. According to Refinery29 article about Kim Kardashian in the early 2000s, a socialite was an affluent, non-working it girl famously purely for being famous. They basically made their money by having paparazzi follow them, existing, and stirring up buzz, and basically made money from publicizing their lifestyle rather than traditional careers. No longer was a socialite or fabulous life officially tied to aristocracy or royalty in any capacity, which is the first step into the dismantling of what it means to be a socialite now. Basically, it's being a party girl and defying what it meant to be in classic high society. A publication called the New York Social Diary wrote an article called The Rise and Fall of the Socialite in September 8th. 2025. They talked about the epitome of the old guard of being a socialite, Brooke Astor, where after her marriage to the grandson of the Astor fortune, had inherited the majority of the estate. Now she was known for being an art collector, being a fundraiser, doing charity events, and going to charity events while wearing jewels that would only be, well, accessible to aristocracy. She was an entertainer and she was a philanthropist. She was iconic. She came from a moment of class, of sophistication, and she had forever shed the title of socialite, as she was part of the leisure class. Ironically, though, at the end of the reign of Miss Astor also came the emergence of a young teenager from a wealthy hotel-owning family, Paris Hilton, who achieved world celebrity through the direct and exclusive result of her posing tirelessly before camera lenses, recording party times. Basically, we're starting to see a pivot, and now being a socialite does not require refinement and instead requires attention, which is starting to show another form of pipeline that we will be discussing later, where now attention might be the newest type of abundance, the newest type of wealth, the newest type of affluence that isn't always tied to money, because you can be famous and you can be poor. We're starting to see the shift now. Remember when I said that Paris Hilton was originally a proper socialite that didn't require social media? Well, now she's also an influencer. So let's talk about that pipeline for a moment. Let's talk about that transition and how internet culture and online spaces have directly created a new power imbalance that required people to basically not much pivot, but align, but to disperse their energy in order to accommodate to the new era of attention. Before we continue talking about the social era amongst Gen Zs and the Socialist Socialite, we have to first start with its death. Paris Hilton created the girly blueprint before Instagram. She monetized her daily nightlife access through traditional media, print, and gossip exposure, said the Los Angeles Times. Something that would be a rare commodity in today's economy of attention holding. There's now a surplus of active, self-proclaimed socialites, and we'd have to wonder, if you have to self-proclaim it, are you a socialite? Now, with the influencer era, we skipped the pipeline from social to mogul, which was the way Paris Hilton pivoted as she changed the world. Just like how activists and influencers pursue media coverage, those are all shifting and changing now. Now, in the influencer era, you are the content creator, you are the mogul, having laid the groundwork for modern influencers. Now, Paris Hilton's transition from being a socialite to a mogul to a content creator and influencer has set the groundwork for Gen Z influencers who want to follow in her footsteps. Paris Hilton now commands her own digital ecosystem with her media company, podcast, and kitchenware. With the influencer era, she had on-screen persona basically active, nonstop participating in the social stratosphere. The problem was that her life was inherently public, which can have its own costs. Paris Hilton has went from a socialite era to her influencer era strategically. This was not meant to be a downplay. This was not meant to be a demotion. This was an accommodating to the new era of what affluence, wealth, fame, fortune, and power looked like. Let's also talk about why Gen Zs are so obsessed with the old money aesthetic. Richard Thompson Ford, a Stanford law professor who wrote the book Dress Codes, How the Laws of Fashion Made History, broadly defined that being called old money aesthetic was anything that invoked mid-20th century East Coast elites. He identified items that were classic and arguing that it wasn't trendy. But in my opinion, when we love the old money aesthetic, it's a way to expand on the trend in a way where we could extend the longevity of our style so we could avoid spending more money when more things come into the social stratosphere. Therefore, it is a response to economic stressors because most old money clothing of high quality, of texture, of thought and style, and consistency in silhouette can sometimes be commonly found in thrift stores, or at least at some point. According to JQ's interview with Ford about the old money aesthetic amongst Gen Z, they were starting to show how nostalgia was a heavy hitter for basically showing a better time in the United States where the West seemed more confident in themselves, where everybody seemed to have a more equitable ability to rise up to the top. Basically being wistful for a long ago type of normalcy founded in traditional classism, which felt controllable, predictable, which is something that subconsciously we might have wanted. Which shows that we are blending class, that affluence is not automatically tied to wealth or who your grandpa was. It was the disruption and blurring of the lines between affluence and affordability, as we take a light and show that old money aesthetic clothing can be commonly found in thrift stores. And therefore, that was basically Gen Z's way of entertaining themselves to that manner. The old money aesthetic wasn't even considered old money because, according to Ford, he says that the type of look that was worn by the preppy or wealthy folk of that time usually involved bright colors, not muted ones. I don't think the current generation TikTokers think that these as old money, but they are clearly signifiers of membership of a certain milieu. How also did the it girl replace socialite culture and shift it to a more form of affordable affluence, blurring the lines between affluent and wealthy, making it where now with a new disruption, a new variation where you did not have to be financially wealthy in order to have affluence. Basically, according to a essay, The Neoliberal Fallacy of Viability and Attainability, that girl aesthetic. This essay argued that the it girl aesthetic or archetype online and the type of behavior and content that was made or pursued by these creators inherently aligned with neoliberal beliefs that talked about the self-improvement journey, that everything is within but also out of your reach through aspirational buying, that technically you could get to exactly where you are, what you want to be, while ignoring the social class parameters and systematic issues and oppressive issues that seem to go under the rug when talking about becoming your highest self, that keep you from actually rising to the top of the ladder. By ignoring the social class or systematic oppressive issues that we have in our society, we are able to create the it girl aesthetic, that everything is in your control, within your reach, while still making you force yourself to the next level. If you're curious in something like that, I might still have it on my Substack or my YouTube. It's basically called the Glow Up Industrial Complex, where I talk about the need to always have to keep figuring out another thing to level up to, and it's never enough. Check it out. The It Girl is inherently attainable through marketing practices, through this parasocial relationship of buying and purchasing, that you can buy it in order to become aspirational, to become affluent. It is basically making it where it's attainable through commerce. But under the cloth of attainability, we are ignoring the systematic and social differences that keep people from climbing that social ladder. Ignoring the distributive system in place that keeps people stationary. Under the cloth of developing yourself as an individual, as young people seem to be striving for individuality and to find themselves only to be stuck in a positive feedback loop that comes from consuming the content to eventually cultivate the personality into making the content themselves and becoming the affluent content creator. Fallacies of the viability, which equals attainability, when it is obviously way too cut and dry to understand fully of what keeps people stationary. Basically, if I will elaborate on this in chapter 6. Elizabeth Kurd-Halleck, professor of public policy at the University of Southern California, joins David to discuss her book, The Sum of Small Things, a theory of the aspirational class, how consumption and wealth or status of other kinds is displayed. Basically, wealth is no longer personified through reckless or consistent spending, but rather to the quiet spending that has to do with things like public policy, education, and healthcare and retirement, and owning a business. It has nothing to do with a fancy Coach or Louis Vuitton bag, because for the most part, as long as you have the resources, anyone can get a Coach bag or get one at a thrift store or get something that looks just like Louis Vuitton. Because let's face it, that pattern is easily like dupable, showing that the things that look like wealth don't require you to actually be wealthy. Hey, it's Editing Mila here. I actually wanted to give an even better example while we are talking about handbags and purses. So think about Hermes and how you always have to be on a wait list in order to get them. It doesn't even matter if you have the money or not. It is the fact that you have to wait and you have to earn the right to buy a Hermes brand for whatever thousands and tens of thousands of dollars that you would have to spend. This is an example of how, despite there being such a disparity in wealth in the US, we're showing that money does not equate to status in the same capacity as, say, to be seen or to be equitable online does. Showing that it doesn't matter how you get the money, you still need to have other status symbols in order to get that said bag. And other brands have to fight other ways to find exclusivity in order to accommodate this new kind of era. And that's something that Hermes would usually do. She basically challenges Forsten Velben's theory of the leisure class, in which he coined the term conspicuous consumption. But she argues that the material goods as status symbols have become less important due to their accessibility. According to her, the new aspirational class now consumes in a more subtle way rather than revealing their status in the traditional way as done with conspicuous consumption. Buying avocados, buying that cute bracelet from TJ Maxx, getting a Starbucks when you go grocery shopping, going to Trader Joe's and Sprouts in one go, shopping at Ulta and dropping 30 or 40 bucks on a moisturizer. That was originally the theory. But now the argument shows that these things are becoming way too more accessible in order for them to be considered a status symbol. Because now consumption is more widely available and accessible. Buying lots of things no longer situates yourself with the wealthy class. Rather, it's not buying things like heirloom tomatoes or avocados or high quality prepackaged sugar-free lemonade or making yourself a nice matcha every morning. And this goes beyond bragging. This is not about bragging online. This is about the what we buy and what we decide to spend our money on for our daily allowance of serotonin. Rather, the things that separate status when it comes to wealth building are things like the school or institution you go to, education, what you study in education, what you pay for your kids, what you do for work, or if you have to work to begin with. It is basically making consumption decisions that lead to those life choices. For example, being able to go to school or college, secondary education, leisurely, to study Latin or Greek without the expectation that you need a job at the end. Another example of the leisure class, according to her new definition. That is another form of conspicuous consumption of the leisure class and what that looks like now. Basically, we're discussing how social mobility is being reproduced over and over and over again, what it actually looks like, and what actually leads to the class disparity that leads to social mobility. Basically, taste will become the new social capital, and that will be discussed a little later in the video. By the way, I have timestamps down below for each chapter. But yeah, French psychologist Pierre Bourdieu, botched that, I'm so sorry, you guys, proposed that taste is not an innate subjective preference, but a form of hidden currency used to maintain the social class. His theory examines how culture knowledge functions as a cultural capital, defining social boundaries as inequality. Let's talk a little bit about the concept of his theories. Culture capital, which is the acclaim that cultural knowledge, skills, and advances like fine dining and classical music and literature are signals of social status. Liking those things are a signal of social status. Habitus, the deeply ingrained habit and skills and disposition that we possess. It is the internalized code we possess that is our guide to our preferences, which relates to how we grew up or our priorities, which heavily is shaped by class. That and its distinction, where in 1979, his work, Distinction, a social critique of the judgment of taste, argues that consumption is a social weapon. Taste is used to classify others, create social distance, and most importantly, to justify status. Through the psychology of taste, we're able to see basically a perspective of internalized systematic privilege that feels entirely personable or individualistic, when really it probably isn't, as we've discussed before. It's the illusion of naturalists. People often believe their taste, such as preference or obscure indie films or a specific vintage wine, is of nature. It's natural, authentic expressions of their personality. But we argue that it is a psychological illusion, and rather these preferences are largely conditioned by early socialization and educational backgrounds related to class. Those who possess this type of social capital view it as a personal marker of intelligence or refinement. It is also inherently a form of social signaling. It is also a form of social signaling. But we're starting to see that through this illusion of taste, we are seeing the beginnings of affordable affluence, that money or wealth will no longer be tied to cultural capital, but rather to the it girl archetype, and to cultural capital no longer having to do with money, because good taste is not purchasable. I want to introduce you guys to an academic paper, The Introduction to the Economics of Abundance by Brenda Sherhan. Basically, we talk about economic inequity. There are three economic systems in place that cause divide: scarcity, sufficiency, and abundance. The system of scarcity is experienced by the poorest of people, while who struggle to access basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare. In contrast, the system of abundance is experienced by the minority of the global population. Despite them being the minority of the global population, they actually make up the majority of the spending power, which means marketers and business owners can't help but want to make things inherently luxurious, because despite them being the 1%, they make up the majority of the global spending power. Therefore, everything for everyone else is becoming unaffordable, because now everything is being designed for the high-end clientele. Think laundry sauce as an example. They're basically treating laundry detergent as cologne. There's so many examples of brands that are redefining basic stuff as a luxury good. That is kind of an issue in my opinion. Basically, overall, these are impacts and efforts for a faster form of consumption culture that encourages people to view social life through the status and prism of consumption. Chapter 2: The Socialist Social Paradox Itself. A socialist socialite is a paradoxical label used to describe individuals who espouse left-wing socialist or anti-capitalistic politics while enjoying an affluent lifestyle, moving in high society elite circles, and frequently curating a public image centered around a luxury lifestyle or status. Basically, we're seeing that Gen Zs are having a form of progressive policies while still believing in the luxury lifestyle that they want. And I was originally studying about the concept of luxury beliefs by Rob Henderson, but I don't want to really continue with that because apparently his stuff is like super like leaning to the right and is very judgmental, and we're not a judgmental bunch. We are starting to see a form of affordable affluence, which I've actually almost gotten in trouble at work for saying, like, oh yeah, Coach is the affordable affluent brand. And they're like, what do you mean by that? Apparently someone did not like the idea of Coach being considered a status symbol, but also being an affordable status symbol. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Gen Zs are finding the way to have progressive policies while living their abundant life or getting close to it. How basically the accommodation of how taste is replacing finances, that one could have a pipeline where basically you are inevitably reaching that social climbing of a ladder through attention and taste, and expressing that taste through attention rather than automatically having the finances to express that taste. So therefore, you are not really experiencing a paradox. It just happens to be that people can climb the social ladder without being financially well off. But I'd have to argue, is this a neoliberal belief that is being personified in the it girl archetype, where they talk about self-improvement, development, and individualistic or individuality while ignoring the systematic barriers that keep people from climbing the social ladder to becoming the it girl, party life, indoor life, etc. I would like to argue that this is not a paradox. That I think, honestly, as a girl's girl, that you could have the best of both worlds. You could have socialistic beliefs. You could believe people could have free healthcare, radical stuff like that, and still experience a wealthy lifestyle. Because what if I told you that in the UK, since their healthcare isn't tied to employment, they have a much more broader range of young entrepreneurs to a capita, because healthcare is no longer applied to employment. This is about equitability, not just equality. Now we are starting to see that when we provide these things, everybody thrives and everybody has the ability to climb that social ladder. That's basically the philosophy that I can fit into it, as I am also trying to climb up my version of the social ladder. I'm going to be hosting a mocktail party next month. I have bad dreams all the time that my home is a bed and breakfast. Oh, the thought of it makes my head hurt. Anyway, transition topic. Basically, we're going to talk about an academic paper from E.A. Seligman, The Democracy of Good Dinners and the Democracy of Consumptions of Luxury, by Cambridge University Press. Basically, he believed in the widespread participation of pleasurable activities as a way of inciting a democracy and a capitalistic democracy. Whether it was dinner or good art was the key to Seligman's idea of a social democracy. If the social surplus remains in the hands of the favored few, while the mass of the community may be largely shut out from the table, there could be no democracy at all in that case. The social surplus must be distributed throughout society. And also keep in mind, he was not a socialist either. He did not advocate for the forced redistribution of property and wealth by the state. It was art, good food, and the ability to experience and consume those things without the needing of a social class divide. European art, high art, museum art is most certainly a luxury. Good dinners at least give totalitarian calories as well as pleasure. Art gives only pleasure, but pleasure itself was a democratic goal of his, one that was now possible in the age of surplus. The real economic ideal, he insisted, is the socialization of luxury and the creation of a surplus of satisfactions. A social surplus of art, yes, said Seligman. The free citizen of the modern industrial state wants justly to participate in the spiritual as well as the material benefits of modern civilization. This participation in the luxuries of modern life is what he called the democratic ideal. That's so cringe. We'll edit that out. Chapter 3, The Death of the Dinner Party. So why is nobody throwing dinner parties anymore? Data shows that Americans' socialization has shifted dramatically, with a nearly 35% drop in hosting social events since 2004. People are increasingly opting out of formal hosting due to a cost of living constraints, overwhelming dietary restrictions, well, in that case, just don't invite the vegan. Sorry, had to say it. The rise of dining out, and the exhaustion of maintaining a social battery after a long work week, according to that article from CNN, The Dying Art of Dinner Parties. Paraphrasing that title, I know I shouldn't. Another quote from that article on why the dinner party is a dying art quotes that young people are seemingly too busy, too burnt out, or too broke to bother. Their homes no longer have formal dining rooms, and they move around too often to hang onto the family china. Many of them live alone. According to the Chicago Tribune, in a new survey from the Rosemount-based International Housing-Ware Association looking at the at-home entertaining landscape, 47% of Gen Z and 39% of millennial consumers said that they plan to host more at-home gatherings in 2026. So why are we seeing this juxtaposition? And we're starting to see an anxiety to hosting. And honestly, I actually am a firm believer that when we see that statistic, it's inherently aspirational. Because yes, I'm planning on hosting my first mocktail party next month. I'm already sending out invitations. I already have a plan, I already have a budget, and I'm making the best hors d'oeuvres ever. They involve ham and a spicy fig jelly. And apparently my mom's like, don't have egg salad. I'm like, I wanted a little cute egg salad sandwich. I need something that's like vegetarian. And she's like, just do a cucumber something. I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out. But basically, I have a feeling that this has a lot to do with inconspicuous consumption, where we are consuming less outwardly and rather internally, that we are cultivating our inner circle. And that is another form of climbing the ladder and another form of the status symbol. This will someday, for most Gen Zs, I predict, will be a slightly attainable status symbol, even if it's just a house party. It is basically a classist system, in my opinion, where the fun stuff seems out of reach. But I like to argue optimistically that might not be able to host a dinner party, but you can host a mocktail party. But I also would love to, in later chapters, get into the loneliness epidemic. How there's a stereotype that Gen Zs are flaky, which I want to argue not against. However, I have experienced it. I invited over like 10 people to my graduation party. 2 of them officially RSVP'd. See ya later. I don't care if you don't like parties. It was my party. I thought we were friends. Disappointment. But when it comes to this, we're seeing a eclectic know-how of what status really looks like. Dinner parties might be another form of inconspicuous consumption of experiences where people can't afford to go to concerts willy-nilly or go to live events or plays, but you might be able to afford to take turns hosting a supper party, if you will, or a supper club of some sort. That is the attainable form of affluence we're starting to see, where you're bringing the experiences into the home, which now supposedly a cozy stay-at-home kind of girly pop is the quiet status symbol that might make the Gen Z generation. If you don't already, this was chapter 1 through 3 of my research project on the Socialist Socialite. If you want access to chapters 4 through 6 on the extended cut, that will be exclusive to paid contributors on my Substack Vanity Thoughts coming up soon. If you enjoyed this, no sweat. I was really happy that you were here for the whole time and you enjoyed my heavy research-oriented stuff that really hurt my head to talk about. But I'd love for you to engage in a discussion down below. I promise you I will comment and I will talk to you because I'm happy. I want to treat this like a little like social circle. Like we're sitting together at the table, let's discuss. And if you want to talk about beauty, politics, power, and culture through the lens of the internet, check out my Substack Vanity Thoughts, where we talk about beauty, power, and policy through all those lenses. I hope to see you guys on the other side. Link to part 2 down below. And if you're like still hesitant on being a paid sub, but you really want to watch part 2 as of this video essay series, I'm going to let you know what we talk about. We're going to talk about how staying in is the new status symbol, how cozy as a aesthetic, luxury, and the introverted class is a signal of status. Basically, we're talking about the decline of why people are entertaining less, but also more at homes, why there's a discrepancy in those statistics and outcomes. How does the loneliness epidemic from COVID play a role in it? We also, in chapter 5, will talk about the taste economy, how curation is king, and the new type of luxury of affluence. We'll talk more about conspicuous consumption and Veblen's effect or theories on it. And in chapter 6, my final thoughts, we will talk about the current evolution of the Gen Z socialite, the party girl, what she looks like now, and what to expect now, and how the girly aesthetic is a class in politics. And we'll discuss more of the that girl and the neoliberal fallacies of the it girl aesthetic or archetype online, the methodology, the commodification of identity, and the neoliberal vision of feminist identification online. How the new socialite is, of course, an introvert. If that is super interesting, please check out my pages, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and subscribe to my Substack. Consider becoming a paid contributor so you can get access to those chapters. See you guys next time. Bye-bye.